Hello everyone, Hyper here, and in today's video I will be giving you a preview to the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. I've watched quite a lot of esports, from League of Legends to CSGO, a little bit of Dota, so I have some experience with different formats and how these tournaments are run, and obviously I've watched WoW PvP tournaments. So I'm just going to give my insight and what I think about this tournament, how I expect it to go down, and what I would like to see out of this tournament. So if you don't know, the Mythic Dungeon Invitational, or the MDI, is basically a competition between all the regions that have access to WoW. So Europe, Asia, America, China. I think those are the four. And it will take place over 3 weeks, with 2 weeks dedicated to group play or the group stage, and 1 week dedicated to tournament play, which is the finals, the final bracket between the regions. Now, the first 2 weeks, it will basically take 8 teams from each region and face them against each other until only 2 teams emerge from each region. This will be done through a best of 3 single elimination bracket. So basically, if you lose one best of 3 series, then you're out of the tournament. And then once there's only 2 teams left standing, those 2 teams will go on to the tournament play, which is again best of 3 with single elimination, and it has a best of 5 final. Now here are a few details about the actual group stage and the tournament play. So the first map will be locked by Blizzard. So they pick what map you play on, and then the next map will be picked by the losing team. And comps and specs can be swapped between dungeons. So if you felt like something didn't go right in one of your runs, you can switch it up for the next run. One thing I don't agree with here is that Blizzard picks your first map for you. In other games where we see multiple maps being possible, there's usually a pick ban phase for choosing maps. And this is something I would have liked introduced into this invitational, because with certain affixes, especially since the teams will know ahead of time what affixes they will be going with, they could potentially ban out 2 maps, for example, and just because those affixes might interact weirdly with the dungeon. If you've done higher key Mythic pluses, you definitely know that for certain affixes, if you get a specific dungeon key, you're just not going to run it, not going to bother with it. And this is the reason why I was hoping to see a pick ban phase, and this would introduce kind of a little mind game part of the Mythic Plus, the tournament, where teams can actually outsmart each other, or they can pick their stronger maps, or if they know that their opponent has a really good map, or in this case dungeon, they can ban that out. Now with best of 3 single elim, this is fine, I think, for the group stage. But once you go into tournament play, a best of 3 single elim is kind of a difficult format, because obviously you lose one series and you're out. There's no way to go in through the lower brackets, so potentially it could happen that the best team and the second best team face each other in the very first round, and one of them wins, and they could have been a potential to win the whole thing, but they went out in the first round, and there's no lower bracket to come into the final through. So this is something I don't necessarily agree with, but again, they do this kind of to conserve time, because obviously if you had double elims, you would have many more games, and it would take place maybe an extra day or an extra 2 days in this case. Now, these games will be played on the tournament realm, which I talked to someone who's taking part in the tournament just to get the specifics. So all gear will be scaled to 935 item level, and this includes legendaries. So your legendaries will be scaled down, and with Mythic Raiders, most of us are about 940 to 943. That's like the average eye level. This means that player will be going into the tournament at slightly lower power than what they're used to on live. But obviously they have access to these tournament realms, so they can actually practice and get used to the power level and the difficulty level of the dungeons. Now all of these dungeons will be done in a plus 17, which I think is a really good number. Because at 935 eye level, a plus 17 currently is pretty challenging, and it gives opportunity for risky plays that might pay off, or might just lose you a bunch of time. So the same Mythic Plus rules apply. If you have a death, then you lose 5 seconds. You're not allowed to leave during the dungeon, which is a standard, so you can't really abuse lock gates with talent switching. Obviously, the team to finish the dungeon in the lowest amount of time wins. So your artifact will be scaled to 965 item level, which is pretty standard. Mine is 970, I think, right now, and that's where most of the players are. This is to compensate for the lack of the Netherlight Crucible on the tournament realms. So even though they're playing this on patch 7.3, they will not have access to the Netherlight Crucible, so they don't get those 15 eye level bonuses and the tier 2 bonuses. And the weapons will be set at 63 traits. So 63 is pretty standard. That's about where most people are at a Mythic raiding scene. You get to choose any legendaries that you want, and you can also buy any Legion trinkets at 935 eye level. So this means, Arcano Crystals, Stat Sticks, any raid trinkets, any dungeon trinkets. So this gives potential for healers to run high item level DPS trinkets if they want to put out more damage, or tanks to run DPS trinkets or defensive trinkets, whatever they want. This gives a really good choice, I think, for players, because on live you might not have the ideal trinkets, but here you go in and all gear is kind of standardized and everything comes down to skill and team comp and practice preparation. So another big thing here is that gear can be swapped during the dungeon, which means that we'll most likely see players have a trash set and then a boss set. This is what I do as well at higher Mythic Plus keys. For trash, you obviously want more AoE. This might depend on the affix, of course. If it's bolstering, maybe you want slightly more, single target in case you need to kill one big mob in a pack of where there's a lot of small ones and then one big one, like in Ivashara with the Murlocs. But in general, for trash, you will want an AoE set. This means you can run AoE trinkets and AoE legendary. And then when you get to the boss, you'll just swap that up and put on your single target legendaries with single target trinkets potentially. And this gives another level of depth to the play, because you not only have to make comp choices, what DPS you're going to take, what healers, what talents, and you actually have gears and you have legendary choices. I really like this because in WoW, this is where most of the interesting parts of the game come from. How can you maximize for a specific affix? How can you be most efficient going through that dungeon? Now, a little bit on the affixes. So, the affixes that they're removing are Necrotic, Skittish, and Bursting. I 100% agree with this decision. Necrotic is really bad on tanks, and it's kind of difficult to deal with, especially in higher affixes where mobs live for a long time. So this could have potentially be kind of like a wild card affix, where they get 2 of the standard affixes and then potentially get a 3rd random affix. But Necrotic, Skittish, and Bursting are all pretty difficult affixes. Skittish, especially if you're a melee. So if there's a melee DPS like a warrior or a death knight, anything like that in the dungeon, and you're running a really high level key, which in this case is a 17 with fortified and bursting or raging, for example, if they turn around on you with skittish, you're just going to get instantly killed. And that just incentivizes people to take either triple ranged or take 2 hunters and a rogue, or just 2 rogues and something else that doesn't get hit. And then bursting is just really difficult for healers, and it prevents basically chain pulling and mass killing targets, which is a really fun thing to see in Mythic dungeons. Whenever you do a huge pull and just AoE everything down, if you have bursting, you can't really do that. Now, all the other affixes will be preset by Blizzard, and since every dungeon is on a plus 17 that they run, they will all have fortified or tyrannical based on the combinations. I have a few comp predictions, just from what I've seen and what I experienced in Mythic Plus and what I expect to see going into this dungeon. So for tanks, I mostly predict that we're going to see a lot of Death Knights, Blood Death Knights, and a lot of Guardian Druids. Probably more so Blood Death Knights because they have really good utility, and with consumption, that extra leech, when you're at this level of gameplay, that extra leech makes a lot of difference because people are doing tons and tons of damage. And this allows your healer to actually output more damage since they don't have to heal as much. And then we obviously have grips, single target grips, AoE grips, and we have a stun with good self-sustain. So a lot of times especially on Tyrannical, tanks need to be healed a lot because they take high amounts of damage. Bosses hit really hard. But with the Blood Death Knight, you can just heal so much and help out your healer so much, and free them up to either heal your team or output damage if they can. Now, with Druid, they have really high damage output on AoE. With triple Thrash Relics, they just do insane amounts of damage when it comes to Thrash. And then when you go to the boss, they obviously don't take too much damage, and they have decent utility with Roar. It can help you out with some mechanics. Now for healers, I mainly see people running either Druid or Paladin. Now why is this? So Druids, they can heal very well on the move. So if you have an affix such as Quaking, where you're getting interrupted, Druids can just hot everyone up, and they don't have to be casting standing still, or Volcanic, for example. You don't have to be standing still to be topping people off because your hots are ticking. And they also have good CC utility with Vortex and Typhoon, so those can be very helpful in certain situations. If your tank is in trouble, you can just drop a Vortex while your tank kites away, or if you're trying to mass interrupt, there's plenty of ways of using that combo. Now Paladins, I see them being used on very difficult bosses where the affixes allow you to be casting whenever you want. So if the affixes are like bolstering, for example, or something that doesn't affect healers too much, right? You bring in a Paladin, they put on double DPS trinkets, you go in and they do 1,000,000 damage on the boss, or DPS. And it's just ridiculous. Paladins can help out so much on Tyrannical if they're given the opportunity to. So in this case, obviously you would run a Blood DK, so with consumption, your whole group would get the leech, and then the Paladin can just go ham and help out and act as a DPS. And they also have really good spot healing and high survivability. They can help other people out with bops, or they can bubble. Also sacks, they have very good utility in general. Now for DPS, there's not really too much to go into detail here, but for casters, I see groups using mages, hunters, and balanced druids. These are basically versatile classes with solid AoE and solid single target damage. Mage, you can obviously run fire for the higher AoE fights or AoE dungeons, or you can run the frost for the more single target oriented or tyrannical oriented dungeons. For melees, the main two classes that I predict we'll see are warriors and rogues. Now, warrior has really good damage. Arms warrior does insane single target damage, so for tyrannical these will be super useful. And they also provide their rallying cry, which for certain mechanics it can save the group. If you're running a Blackrook Hold, for example, last boss, on a plus 17 with tyrannical, the AoE Shadow Bolt comes out. That rallying cry might save your group. Rogues have really high burst damage, obviously, on a low cooldown. Same with warriors. Their offensive cooldowns are on a short duration, so they can use it basically every pack. And as I said, high versatility and survivability, with Cloak of Shadows, Feint, Shadow Step, and both these classes are very mobile, which is key for Mythic pluses. You can charge, leap, Shadow Step, Shadow Strike. There's ways to get around. So these are the main comps that I think we'll be seeing. A combination of these casters melee with the tank side I mentioned above. Or these are the main classes, I should say, which we will be seeing. Just one more thing about the affixes. Blizzard wanted to keep the visual affixes, because in a Mythic Plus, there's so much going on with the cast, or the ads casting AoE abilities and dots and visual effects everywhere. Blizzard wanted to kind of have the affixes that affect the dungeon visually. So if you think about volcanic or explosive, they're very easily identifiable visual cues, right? You see a little volcano on the ground, if someone stands in it, they got hit, you know they did something wrong. If one of the orbs explodes, you know they did something wrong. And then with bolstering, for example, if one of the ads gets huge, you know they might have messed something up. And it will be very interesting to see exactly how they deal with all these situations. A few things that I would really like to see in this invitational, as far as casting and viewership goes, is giving a rundown or analysis of the talents that players choose for each dungeon, and a little explanation of the comps, maybe, as well as a rundown of how the affixes affect a certain dungeon. So we know, if especially if you've done higher mythic pluses, that certain bosses are really difficult with certain affixes, and I really hope that they explain those. Obviously, the caster team is very good and they're all top tier raiders, um, but I really hope they go over this because, as far as esports goes, from my experience, especially in League of Legends, where you have certain builds, um, you watch a pro game and then you take that to your gameplay, right? So you watch their build path, you see what they do, you kind of watch them play, see how they do the laning phase in League's example, and then you kind of try to take that to your own game. And I hope they do that with this Mythic Dungeon Invitational, because a lot of players want to see how top tier, top level players deal with these situations. You know, if this is the affix combo, what talents do you take? What legendaries do you take? How do you deal with different situations? And you know, copy what he saw during the invitational from these top level players, and then take that into his own gameplay. Whenever he's running a mythic dungeon with his friends, or you know, pugging or whatever. I really hope that they give us these previews that will help the general player base get better at the game. That's pretty much all I have for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments about the Mythic Dungeon Invitational, leave them in the comment section below, and we'll see you on the next video.